The crucial Disney shareholder vote in which the proxy fight will be settled is upon us. Some may wonder though, what's the big deal? Let's say that Nelson Peltz and Jay Rasulo make it onto the board. And that is very unlikely. If anything, it's just going to be Nelson Peltz. And even if that were to happen, what can he, one lone board member, do against the other 10 who are Iger loyalists, up to and including Bob Iger himself? Let's find out. The Disney proxy war has taken on a level of both animosity and public interest rarely seen outside of presidential elections. Such is the cultural reach and influence of Disney. The battle lines are firmly drawn between BlackRock-aligned institutions and individual sufferers of the TDS-related condition Shapek derangement syndrome, who thinks that Bob Iger can do no wrong in one end and be more level-headed in the other, like ISS, the Institutional Shareholder Services, who recommended all their members use their proxy vote to actually support Nelson Peltz, because they recognize that under Iger, something is indeed rotten within Disney. But differing interests and loyalties aside, what can one man do against a full board so staunchly pro-Iger? We're about to look into that. And more specifically, why Bob Iger and his acolytes have been so hell-bent on keeping Nelson Peltz, who is one of their major shareholders, off that board. And not only that, even denying him access to board procedure and meetings. I'll tell you right off the bat that that is not normal and very suspicious right there. But to do things in their proper order, let's begin with what a board is and what it is supposed to do. So you don't have to rely solely on my word. Let's head on over to Investopedia and see what they say about the board of directors. We're gonna have to get a little bit technical right here, but I am going somewhere with this, and this is going to be really important later on, so bear with me. Investopedia defines the board of directors as the governing body of a company, whose members are elected by shareholders in the case of public companies to set strategy, oversee management, and protect the interests of shareholders and stakeholders. So, in the very first sentence, it was established that the board of directors are elected by the shareholders, and they are to protect the interest of first and foremost their shareholders, and secondarily other stakeholders, which we unfortunately have to touch on as well. That stakeholder bit is a recent addition and a purely theoretical proposition, only added because the one who invented it is very evil, but also very powerful and wanted that word added in. And I'll get back to what it means, but what you need to know is that legally it is bunk. Public companies and their board of directors have fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders only, and no other stakeholders, something which is confirmed by the Corporate Governance Institute. So much so that even they themselves have highlighted it on their own webpage. A board member's fiduciary responsibility is to act in the best interest of their company and its shareholders. Fiduciary duty is a quite simple concept. Fiduciaries are individuals who must put their clients' interests ahead of their own. Removing any semblance of doubt, it is even stated explicitly to any board member who may be wondering. As a board member, your fiduciary responsibility is to act in the best interest of the company and the shareholders you serve. Seems simple enough, so what's this thing about stakeholders, which someone evidently are trying to equate with shareholders? What are stakeholders anyway? It's a long answer, but to make it short and get the point across. These stakeholders are the birdies in the sky, the fishies in the sea, and the angry activist mobs marching the ground. The stakeholder capitalism model, or commie capitalism model as I like to call it, essentially states that the shareholders are just another group of stakeholders, and it's really unfair and outdated that the shareholders should have some sort of privilege compared to all the other stakeholders. It would be much more equitable if all stakeholders, investors with millions on the line and angry activists with no real ties to the company alike, were treated the same. It's under the stakeholder capitalism model that ESG and DEI are mandatory. They don't necessarily benefit the shareholders much, but they sure do benefit all of those stakeholders. But do companies have any fiduciary responsibilities to these stakeholders? Well, as much as Investopedia may tacitly try to make it seem that way, and as much as Klaus Schwab may wish it was so, according to a piece printed by the Oxford Law blog from Robert Flanagan, professor at law, the real answer is nope, none whatsoever. The current paradigm of shareholder primacy, which comes with fiduciary responsibilities to the shareholders, is what is mandated by law, and even though there are some very powerful entities fighting to make stakeholder capitalism the paradigm of the future, it is, as of now, but a theory, or better yet an ideology, and depending on how it is executed, it may even be in conflict with current, as in actual, law. Case in point, even the mighty BlackRock, the battering ram of the WEF, were just hit with the first of its kind cease and desist order and threat of massive fines regarding its alleged false and misleading statements to investors regarding its ESG practices. So, now that we know that anything to do with stakeholders is voluntary at best and illegal at worst, what have we learned about the rules public companies are legally bound by? Well, that the board members of a public company are to be appointed by the shareholders, and those board members have a fiduciary responsibility to act on behalf of the shareholders, which in turn means that it is their job to hold the CEO accountable to the shareholders.
Everybody got that? Good!
With that firmly established, let's see what is the reality of the board at Disney. To do that, let's head on over to what is the most explosive exposé on Disney to date, namely the CNBC piece on the shenanigans that went on with the transition from Iger to Chapek and back to Iger. Here it is stated, by 2019, Iger had personally selected every member of the board, which is surprisingly lacking in media and entertainment experience. Iger is personally close with several directors, including Nike Executive Chairman Mark Parker and General Motors CEO Mary Barra. In addition, the wife of another board member, Michael Froman, then Vice Chairman of MasterCard and now President of the Council on Foreign Relations, had been housemates with Iger's wife, Willow Bay, at the University of Pennsylvania. Meaning, for several years now, no one in Disney's board have been appointed by the shareholders. Instead, they have all been appointed by the very CEO they on paper are supposed to hold accountable, something they're not capable of doing as they all have some kind of personal connection to him, a conflict of interest that normally should have precluded them from serving on the board in the first place. This is beyond a mere violation of fiduciary responsibilities. This is outright corruption bordering on criminal malfeasance. The consequence of this is that Disney functionally doesn't have a board, and Disney shareholders have no idea what the hell is going on in what passes for Disney board meetings. There is no transparency there, and this ties right into why, just a few days ago, America First Legal accused Disney of not just misleading shareholders, but for illegal discrimination over their far-reaching DEI policies, which directly and indirectly have cost Disney shareholders a market cap loss of 40%, or more than $130 billion, all because Iger and his board chose to become activists, seemingly practicing stakeholder capitalism on shareholder expense, without the shareholders ever being consulted about it or agreeing to it. Rather than holding Iger accountable to the shareholders, Disney's board functionally shields him from them. To illustrate with a hypothetical example, if Bob Iger wants to do something so radical that he needs board approval to do it, than under normal circumstances. The board would have to be called in and informed, debate every facet of it between themselves, reach a verdict, and then vote on whether or not they agree it is in the best interest of shareholders. But the way Disney's board is currently structured, Bob Iger could in principle call a board meeting, let his friends on the board know that as a formality, he needs them all to sign that dotted line right there. Don't ask any questions, just sign it, damn it, and adjourn the meeting, and voila! Something the shareholders would never agree to now has board approval. I'm not saying that that is how Disney is run right now, but it might as well be, because again, no one knows what the hell is going on in Disney board meetings, least of all Disney's shareholders. Now, when we have established the current state of affairs in Disney's board, and the conflict between stakeholder capitalism and shareholder primacy, let's circle back to Nelson Peltz and the proxy war. Never mind that Nelson Peltz would still be just one of 11 board members, with the other 10 still being in Iger's pocket. The big deal here is that Peltz merely being allowed into the room alone would mean the immediate end of the secrecy that is currently shrouding what Disney are actually doing, because for the first time in nigh on a decade, Disney shareholders would actually have elected a board member, and one who will look after their interests because he is himself a shareholder, and a major one to boot. By contrast, the current board has, relatively speaking, mere pocket change invested in the company and no real interest in shareholder value. Yet, if anyone on that board were to go against shareholder interest, Peltz would now be in a position to expose that. More than that, he would have access to books that would conclusively reveal if that already has happened, which if so could get very, very ugly for those guilty of it. Violating fiduciary duty is no little thing, and the excuse, "but I did it for DEI and for the fishies in the sea," might not hold up all that well in a court of law. And since Team Iger are so desperate to keep Peltz out, it is not unfair to wonder what they may be trying to hide. So that is what is on the ballot here. Openness with Peltz, or Iger still running Disney however he sees fit, under a shroud of secrecy. Shareholders be damned. When I've laid out the case this way, you might wonder, why would anyone endorse Bob Iger at all, like Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, did? Well, if I had to make a wild guess, then my stab in the dark would be that what Bob Iger seemingly has been doing is running Disney under the stakeholder capitalism model. And like the WEF and BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase are all about that, something Jamie Dimon made clear in his 2023 shareholder letter. Forbes quoted from that letter, in a piece which was written by a pro-stakeholder capitalism advocate, I might add, where it was stated, "While the stakeholder capitalism business model rejects short-term shareholder primacy, it doesn't neglect its shareholders. It wants all its stakeholders, employees, customers, the corporation itself, communities, society at large, the environment, with its fishies and its buddies, and no less than any others, even though they're mentioned last, its shareholders, to gain through its productive work." Everyone of that mindset would of course want Iger to continue his work transforming Disney, without those pesky shareholders getting in the way of changing the world. The Iger regime's mantra to every Disney shareholder eligible to vote for the last few months has been "Vote Disney," which is gaslighting speak for "Vote Bob Iger's board picks." But in reality, a vote for Bob Iger's board picks is a vote for continued secrecy, and for continued violation of fiduciary duties, and for stakeholder capitalism, all at shareholder expense. The alternative is to vote for Peltz, and ideally for Jay Rasulo, which is to vote for openness, the rule of law, and for a gradual return to shareholder primacy, under which Disney must create products and experiences that delight customers and audiences worldwide, so that they will buy more Disney products and thus grow the company to the benefit of shareholders. That is what is actually on the ballot here, and what Peltz getting on the board actually means. So, where do you stand? Team Peltz or Team Iger? Let me know in the comments.